Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. It's delightful to have Dr. Brian McVeigh back and honored, of course. Brian has spent 16, 17 years in Japan. He's written several books on Japan. And for the last few years, he has not been working too much in Japan. So this is kind of coming back and looking at that, which actually gives you a tremendous perspective. So I'm delighted to have Brian do this series. Today, we're talking about cuteness. Take it away, Brian.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. So let me begin what I want to say about cuteness with a short anecdote. When I was studying the Japanese language in Yokohama back in the late 1980s, at the end of the language program, each student had to give a presentation in Japanese on some research topic that they were interested in. So most students talked about the history of Japanese socialism, or perhaps some on a fine art like ikebana or kabuki, no drama, literature, and that was expected. But what I did was something that I think surprised people, because I had been in Japan for a year, and what had struck me was how cuteness was everywhere in Japan, and no one seemed to be talking about it. And so I decided to do my presentation on that. And the many people in the audience, many people were from the local community in Yokohama, and they were quite surprised and I think taken aback by this foreigner who was talking about something that I think many people did not think was important, or they thought that it didn't really matter. You know, why is this young grad student talking about something associated with children and women and pets? But I had an intuition at the time that there must be something significant about cuteness, because as I said, it was everywhere. And so when you go to Japan, and I'm going to assume, I haven't been back to Japan in a while now, but I'm going to assume that wherever you go, whether you're dealing with advertising, you're looking at company logos, greeting cards, public announcements put out by the local government, even pornography, cuteness plays this incredibly important role. And so I actually, my research in Japan was on spirit possession, but that's a whole nother topic. But on the side, I decided to write something about cuteness. And it took me about 10 years to publish a short article on cuteness in Japan in an academic journal, because nobody was interested. And it wasn't until about the mid 90s that I was able to do that. But since then, since the 90s, now many researchers take cuteness quite seriously in Japan, and it's not looked down upon at all. And of course, since that time, also Japanese pop culture has made a huge impact, not just in America, but around the world. And everyone seems to know what cuteness is. But at the time when I was in Japan, like I said, people did not view it as a serious research topic. So what I want to do today is talk about why cuteness should be considered a significant research topic, because I think that cuteness says a lot about values in Japan and about how many Japanese go through the typical day, how they view the world, how they view their social relations. But let me, at this point, emphasize that, not surprisingly, not all Japanese like cuteness. And when I did research on cuteness, many Japanese made it very clear that they did not like cuteness. So I just want to put that out there now, because I don't want to paint all Japanese with the same brush. I don't want to stereotype Japanese, of course, because there's a lot of diversity in Japan. So let me tell you how I approached cuteness as a research topic from the point of view of an anthropologist. And usually, at least the way I was trained in anthropology, when you see something in a culture that many people are talking about, that is everywhere, I mean, it seems obvious, but it needs to be researched, it needs to be studied, because it's whatever that thing is, whether it's a symbol, a word, an image, if it's ubiquitous in a society, it has to have great significance. And the way I approached it is I approached cuteness as what anthropologists call a key symbol or a dominant symbol. And what does that mean? There are three features of a key or dominant symbol. The first one is what we call multivocality. And that's just a fancy word that means many interpretations. So multivocality means many voices. And so the point here is that when you ask an individual in Japan what cuteness means to them, and that's basically what I did for my research. I just went out on the street and I interviewed a lot of people. Needless to say, the interpretation they give, the meaning of cuteness to that individual will vary depending on gender, age, education level, occupation, even what part of Japan they're from. So in any case, that's an important point to keep in mind, that we're talking about cuteness. We're looking at a whole spectrum of different meanings that vary depending on the person. There are some common denominators, there are some common motifs, but nevertheless, diversity, I think, has to be recognized. The other key, the other aspect of a dominant or key symbol is what we call condensation. And that just means one symbol can bring together many different meanings. Think of a national flag, for example. What does the flag stand for? It stands for, of course, many meanings, but they're all condensed, they're all brought together. And that's what cuteness does in the case of Japan. And then the final feature of dominant or key symbols is ambiguity. In other words, because there's so many different interpretations, because there are so many ways that people use and interpret a symbol, there's going to be a bit of vagueness. There's going to be a bit of ambiguity associated with that symbol. So let's just give some examples of what people would say about cuteness. And again, when I first did this research, this research is a little bit old. Since I've done it, many other people have taken up cuteness as a topic. But in any case, some common things people would say is that cuteness is something soothing. It relaxes them, it's comforting, it gives them a sense of security. To quote one individual, it's a way of forgetting about the unpleasant things we all have to put up with every day. And some people have even argued that cuteness for the average Japanese is a type of therapy that, given the pressures in a highly modernized, a post-industrialized society like Japan, where it's very competitive, people need a break. And the way they get that break, of course, is through cuteness. So that's just, one theory, we might say, of why cuteness is so prevalent in Japan. So related to this idea is how cuteness sweetens social relations. And I think one way to look at it is the image many of us get of Japan. For example, if we watch images of Japan through the internet, or especially the TV, at least the images that I was exposed to when I was young, it was this idea that Japan is a highly formal society. It's very strict. Ceremonies and rituals play a big role because everything has a procedure, a certain way it needs to be done. There's not a lot of room for spontaneity. That's one image of Japan. But the reality is that if you go to Japan, I'm sure many of you have, and walk around, you'll see that Japan can be a very casual place. It can be a very informal place. There's a lot of lightheartedness in Japan. And like I said, I think today's generation, because of technology and media, they're more exposed to those images. So it may not be surprising for many people to hear that. But I bring this up to show how cuteness is an attempt to soften social relations in Japan. And of course, needless to say, one thing that many people associate with cuteness is the female sex. And so this is where we can talk about this later, but just to mention it now, this is where the sexism comes in, I suppose. So to give you an example, big corporations in Japan, Japan Airlines, I don't think they do this anymore, but years ago, I remember they would have the flight attendants wear Minnie Mouse ears to sort of resemble a mouse. And of course, many people in Japan, outside Japan, found that humiliating. But that's just one example of how there just seems to be a strong connection between femaleness and cuteness. But like I said, we're talking about a very dominant symbol, which means there's a lot of room for maneuver within this image of cuteness. And when I was in Japan, many men, young boys, and even older men would like cuteness. So it is not, we can't connect it entirely to women. So let me also talk about how cuteness has to do with, to put it simply, those with power and those without power. And so, again, we're talking about linkages and connections between different images and how they all sort of come together in this complex dynamic. And of course, it's up to the individual person to give an interpretation to this complex dynamic. But ideally, those who have, in many modern societies, those who have power, and again, not to sound sexist, because I don't believe that only men have power. I've been around long enough to learn that. But the idea is that those who can control other people, of course, are linked to images of strength, masculinity, dark colors, maybe being a bit gloomy, adults, maturity, people who are serious, maybe a bit taciturn, doesn't say much, and big things, okay, when we talk about the world of perception. But opposed to that all those different descriptions of power, of course, is a whole world of images that have to do with those who lack power, powerlessness, people or groups of people who feel controlled by others. So we're talking about weakness, femininity, being a sort of forced cheerfulness, bright colors, infants, children, youth, lighthearted, being outgoing, friendly, and small things. So again, that's a lot. Those are a lot of things I just listed. But again, we're talking about a key symbol, cuteness, and a key symbol. It's like a spectrum, like a fan. It's going to have all these different meanings connected. So now let me talk about what when I was in Japan. I think that I identified 3 key social values or norms and these norms seem to be related to the use of images of cuteness. The first social norm is hierarchy. And we have to be very careful here because all societies have notions of hierarchy, not just Japan, of course. I think perhaps the Japanese are maybe just a bit more honest about it. And so when I was in Japan, the idea is to know who you control and to know who controls you. And in Japan, there's a lot of talk of student-master relationships or junior-senior relationships. And the idea is that, especially in the work world, the idea is to seek out someone who knows more than you do to help you along in your career. And for those of us who have studied martial arts, of course, there's this idea of sensei, which means master or teacher, instructor. But sensei is a word that's used in many different social domains in Japan. And again, it goes back to this emphasis on hierarchy. So that's not to say that all relations in Japan are hierarchical. They're not. All I'm saying is that the image is that hierarchy does play a big role in Japan. And so how does this relate to cuteness? Well, I think the idea is that there's a lot of emphasis on cuteness because cuteness softens superior inferior relationships. Uh, the idea is to somehow make those in authority look less threatening. And let me read you a short quote from famous philosopher Michel Foucault, who was talking about power and how power is represented, because I think this relates directly to cuteness. And he wrote, since power is tolerable only on condition that it masks a substantial part of itself, its success is proportional to its ability to hide its own mechanism. And so it seemed to me that in Japan, when we see cute images, we always have to ask ourselves, what is it hiding? And of course, don't forget that cuteness very much is wrapped up in Japan's commercial corporate culture. So there's a whole, that's something else to talk about, but there's a whole economic aspect to cuteness that is relevant. And so when you go to Japan, you'll see big corporations using images of cuteness, banks, the military in Japan has been known to use images of cuteness for recruitment and of course to soften their image. The police use images of cuteness. I don't know if they still do, but when I was there, you can find this, you can just Google, you'll find it, but this character called People-chan. And it was a little mascot. It looked like a mouse from Mars. That's how I would describe it. But this would be on, this image of this alien mouse would be everywhere in Tokyo when I was there, anywhere where the police would have a presence. And of course, the idea is to soften the image of the police through images of cuteness. So I talked about how cuteness relates to hierarchy. The second value or social norm is, for, I guess in English, though, I would sum it up with the word obedience. And there's this word in Japanese that is usually translated as to be obedient, sunao. But sunao can mean to be submissive, gentle, to be meek, receptive, compliant, to be cooperative. It can have positive connotations: open-minded, non-resistant, truthful, maybe naive, natural, simple, mild. But the idea here is that someone who wants to show themselves as being obedient, the common image that they would use, of course, would be cuteness. And so this again brings in the relationship between men and women. So the idea, and I'm not saying all Japanese women like cute or were cute. I want to be very clear. I'm just saying some women in Japan would use cuteness or play this role of being cute in order to signal to whomever that they were being obedient. Not just women, but children also. Children also. And then the final social norm that I think relates to images of cuteness is empathy. The idea is that showing or identifying, associating with cuteness somehow triggers a sympathetic response in another person. And in Japanese, cuteness is kawaii. That's an adjective, but there's a cognate of kawaii, which is a kawaii so, which means to be pitiful. So you can see a relationship there. And there's another cognate to kawaii, which is kawaii garu, which means to love, to make a pet of, to take loving care of someone. So in any case, that just gives you an idea of what cuteness means in Japan. So there's a lot of things I could say. Maybe I'll skip it now because it's a tremendous amount of information. But the role of femininity and cuteness, and again, not all women like cuteness. It certainly seems to be related to what we might call, for lack of a better word, femaleness. And so in traditional Japanese aesthetics, there was this idea that a piece of art, or it could be not necessarily a piece of art, but just how you describe something, would either be, the Japanese word would be hade, H-A-D-E, which meant gaudy, colorful, or flashy. But traditionally in Japan, the idea is that real art should be what they would call jimi, G-I-M-I, which means plain, simple, subdued. But if you look at Japanese aesthetics, it's usually, depending on what you're looking at, it's somewhere in between. And of course, obviously, cuteness goes to the gaudy side of things. And so that's one thing that really surprised me when the first time I went to Japan. And again, we're talking a long time ago. We're talking 1986, 1987. And I was struck at, again, for lack of a better word, how gaudy and how flashy and how colorful daily life was in Japan, because I had been brought up on these images that Japan is a place of kabuki, no theater, flower arrangement, refined poetry, haiku, but actually daily life, I think for most Japanese, is a much more vibrant, a much more colorful place. Let me show you this book. It's a catalog, as you can see. It says Hello Kitty. It's kind of a thick catalog, and this book is maybe I think it's over 20 years old. And basically, of course you can't see it too well, but if you were able to see it, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of commodity goods and objects that all have to do with Hello Kitty. In fact, even a car, I'm sure not many people bought it, but you used to be able to buy a car that was designed along Hello Kitty lines. So this is just, I just showed this as one example of how to show the economic clout, you might say, of cuteness. And then this book here called Wearing Ideology, State Schooling and Self-Presentation in Japan. This book is mostly about uniforms and uniformity in Japan, but actually it deals a lot with cuteness, because as I said before, cuteness really is an aesthetics to oppose formality, to oppose uniformity. Cuteness in many ways is associated with this idea that supposedly Japanese lack individuality. Of course, if you've been to Japan, if you know Japanese, you know that they're very individualistic. And there's just one more thing I'll show you. Again, I know it's difficult to see, but well, in any case, speaking of uniformed, I don't know if you can see that photograph, but it's outside a factory, and that's a cute image of a worker in his uniform, and there's a mirror next to him. And before you enter the factory, you're supposed to look at that mirror and make sure that your uniform is in order before you go in. And so that's a good example of how they're using cuteness to give instructions. And again, here's another. This is a life-size image of I guess you would describe it as cute. He's a train worker, and again, that's just that's just one example. And then just some more cute images. And as I said, I didn't prepare to show you cute images, because it's so easy to just go online, type in cute Japan, and you'll find a flood of cute images. And the final point I'll make, again, it's very difficult to see, but this is a chart right here, 2 dimensions, where I try to talk about types of cuteness. And the point here, cuteness is such a dominant symbol. Cuteness is so important in the daily landscape of Japan. You actually have a whole variety of different types of cuteness. And I try to come up with a system where you have innocence versus eroticism, infantile versus mature, and then on those, using those 2 dimensions, I would plot out the different types of cuteness. So for example, there's authority cuteness, corporate cuteness, maternal cuteness, elderly cuteness, teen cuteness, sexy cuteness, pornography cuteness. Unfortunately, there's something called child pornography cuteness, baby cuteness, very young cuteness. In any case, I hopefully you get the idea. So I think maybe I'll end there. And if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
Sure. So let's do one thing. I think instead of the breakout rooms, let's do questions first, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. So folks, we've got 4 rules as always. Go ahead and type your exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Rule number 2, keep on topic. Rule number 3, be brief. Just focus on questions. Try to be brief. And number 4, feel free to speak your mind, disagree with anybody on anything, and do so courteously. First up is going to be Alex, followed by Madeline. Alex.
Hi, thanks very much for the talk. I was wondering if you found any origins for cuteness. I mean, can you kind of trace it back to a particular moment, or is there kind of an evolution from the past, or anything like that?
That's an important question. It's a good question. I'm not sure exactly. However, I do know that if you look at very old dictionaries, Japanese dictionaries, they did refer to what we might call cuteness many, many centuries ago. However, my impression is that cuteness, the way we think of it today in the modern world, did not really take off until probably after the war in Japan. And a lot of it had to do, a lot of cuteness has to do with economics. And companies have found out that people are attracted to cuteness for some of the reasons why I gave, and they've really cashed in on this image of cuteness. So I guess what I'm trying to say, to summarize, is I think most of what we see when it comes to cuteness is more of a modern or postmodern phenomenon.
Thank you. Next up, and this is a great question. Next up is Madeline, followed by Raj. Madeline.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Brian. This is great. I have a 2-part question. One is the topic of kitsch arose in chat. So the first question is, does cuteness have that sort of ironic distance that allows people to enjoy it? My second is an idea, maybe a question about the origins of cuteness. I think that the Netsuki, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I think everyone's probably seen them. They're those tiny carved ivory figurines that originated just as the toggle buttons on the pouches that people would wear by their sides. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that perhaps those are the origins of the little cuteness Pokemon figures and things like that.
Yes, they could be. In fact, the direction you're going in involves what are called character goods. And I didn't talk much about that, but obviously most character goods we could describe as cute. And character goods are really a good example of how cuteness is everywhere. And a lot of academics have written about the role of character goods in Japan. And in fact, well, I won't try to do it now, but I know that I happen to have some photographs of character goods. And I'm not sure if that answers directly your question, but you, Madeline, you had a first question too, and it escapes me.
Yes. My first question was whether, like here in Western culture, camp and kitsch both have an ironic distance that allows people to genuinely enjoy the stuff, but while feeling that they are somehow highbrow in doing so instead of being lowbrow. Instead of just being unabashedly saying, hey, I like this, velvet draped mirror and with figurines around the sides. And I'm wondering if kawaii in Japan has the same ironic distance to it.
That is a very good point, and my answer would be absolutely. Again, it depends on the individual. I think if you're a young person or maybe a young female in your teens or something, maybe you don't have that sense of ironic distance or what we would call kitsch. But the cuteness, I mean, I think you could probably talk about what we might call cuteness. So yes, most definitely, cuteness has been used that way. It is used that way. That where people enjoy it. I mean, I have to confess, I enjoy cuteness, and probably it's I'd like to convince myself it's out of a sense of sophisticated irony, not because I really enjoy looking at cute images. And I can't think of particular examples right now, but I know that there have been some artists, Japanese artists, who have really incorporated the image of cuteness into their art for purposes of ironic distance.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Raj, Kevin, John, Darlene, and Deborah. Raj.
Hi, yes. So I had a brief question if you know anything about Moe culture.
I don't know a lot about it. I've heard of it. Perhaps you can sort of remind me. I think it's this idea where someone focuses on a particular image from pop culture.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Honestly, I'm not 100% sure what it is either, which is why I was kind of asking. I read a long time ago just a little bit about it. When I was first getting into the whole craze, and obviously, like, I know how to use the word itself, but I'm not quite sure what encompasses the whole term moe culture. Like, if you say that's moe, then it means it's a very specific type of cute. But it can also be used in different ways, like moe sode, which is like the phenomenon of where girls will wear their hoodie sleeves right up until like the middle of their hands. So like it covers most of their hands, and that's like a very cutesy thing for girls to do, especially in Japan. So like that's called moe sode because I don't know what sode means exactly, I forgot, but it appeals to that specific type of cuteness called moe.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not really certain on what it means. I mean, it's something that I think it started to emerge maybe 10, 15 years ago in Japanese culture. I think for me, which hard to believe, maybe for some people, is a relatively is relatively new. But so I'm not sure exactly what it is. But you said something. I think it does have something to do with women, young girls.
Yeah, it's a specific type of. It uses the kanji for burning, for fire. Right? It uses like moeru no mo.
Moeru, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a type of like burning cuteness.
I could be wrong, so somebody might want to check this out. Yeah, moeru means to burn. I think this idea of desire, and I could be wrong, so I'm going to be very cautious.
It's the specific type of word for burning that you use when referring to emotion for the most part.
Exactly.
Literally, but like you say, burning desire. So like, moeru kokoro or something like that.
Right, and I think in this context, it can have a powerful, more than the nuance of sexual desire.
Of course, yes.
Passion. Yeah.
Thank you. Folks, here there are many people who are originally from Japan. There are people who have spent a lot of time in Japan, and there will be plenty of time. What we're going to do is we're going to take these questions, and then we are going to go into breakout rooms. in small groups. We're going to discuss this, and then when you come back, you'll be able to ask another round of questions. So we're going to take about 4 more questions, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. It's going to be Kevin, John, Darlene, and Deborah. Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Brian. That's a great topic, and I agree with everything what you see. It's the Japanese femininity is like frequently associated with notion of kawaii, which is cuteness. It's a kind of one-sided story for Japanese women. Another side, since globally, see from the feminist perspective, it look like a little bit. I don't use the strong words. It's look like, you know, look down them so childish or need a security kind weakness. Yeah, my question is why Japanese, they promote them very well. This like icon like Hello Kitty. Nobody see, okay, that's a discrimination of a lady or something. Then, however, the one, what do you think about that? Yeah, thank you.
So I think you're if I followed you correctly, I think you're asking about why more Japanese are not critical about the sexist implications of these cute images, especially if a connection is made with women being infantile and being childish. And that's an important question. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I think if you look around, if you go to Japan, as I said, you will find women who do not like cuteness, and some women are actually offended by it. And of course, there is a feminist movement in Japan. We probably don't hear about it that much in North America. But I guess the point I'm making is that there is what we might call some resistance to infantilizing, using cute images to infantilize women. So that's, I think, important to take into account.
Thank you. Next up is going to be John, Darlene, and Deborah. John.
Hi, Brian. Thanks. First, I just want to say I'm sorry. I tuned in a little bit late, so I apologize if I missed anything, but the part I caught was fascinating. And my question is, so in my work, I sort of happenstance to have to work on a project involving Takashi Murakami. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He is a sort of Japanese contemporary artist. He works with a lot of cute imagery, somewhat in a subversive way. He's a big sort of part of the street art scene, I guess. I don't know if he's like a street artist. It's sort of out of my depth, but like they like him a lot. And one of the things he does is he has a character called Mr. Dobb. Mr. Dobb is, I'm not sure if you've seen him, but he's like a Mickey Mouse. He just looks like a Mickey Mouse on acid, basically. And he has like really, he's combining elements of like Mickey Mouse and Sonic the Hedgehog and Hello Kitty. And the, you know, this is sort of other people's thoughts, so this is not my interpretation, but I mean, it is my interpretation, but basically based on those thoughts, so this is not my insight. But basically he is, he's sort of being subversive in this cutification of culture, this what you would call like commodification of culture. Mm-hmm. And I just want to know if you sort of have, you know, seen his work or have experienced it. I think it's really fascinating because it's sort of this nexus of what you're talking about with cuteness, but used by this sort of, you know, modern male artists to sort of talk about how culture in Japan has sort of been in some way, I don't want to say invaded, but it's also reacting to the American culture and how it sort of, in some senses, had cheapened things for people. I've also, one last point I just want to raise. There was I remember reading some things about how like in World War II, right after the war, because Japan didn't have an army anymore, and, you know, males didn't really have, or fighting, you know, people, I guess really males, right? They didn't really have a way to, they felt a bit emasculated, right? And this, and so I think there's some of that going on in there. So I just wanted to see the thoughts on that. Thanks.
Okay. So actually, Jonathan, that's, I think what you brought up is really important because it relates to what Madeline mentioned about sort of ironic cuteness or enjoying cuteness from an ironic perspective, and to go a step further, looking at cuteness from a subversive perspective. And yes, Murakami is actually quite famous. I'm not very familiar with his work, but I know something about his work because, as you pointed out, he does use cuteness to criticize cuteness, but not just to criticize cuteness, but to criticize a lot of things in Japanese society. And of course, you mentioned this idea of commercialization and cheapening of, I think, not just art, but perhaps values in general. So yes, that he's I think a very good example of using cuteness against itself. And this is, again, this shows us how dominant cuteness is, that it's so open to different interpretation. It's so ubiquitous that it can be turned around on itself. And then the second point you made, so when I was in Japan, a lot of people would say that, the Japanese would say that about themselves, that the Japanese are somehow have been demasculinized because, well, they lost a war and they were occupied for 7 years by the Americans, and they do have a military now. Of course, they call it defense force, but it is basically, it's one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world. But nevertheless, there is this idea that something has been lost. I don't really believe that myself. I don't think. I mean, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because you're talking about millions and millions of Japanese men. And I mean, when I lived in Japan, they certainly, they could be masculine if they had to be. Of course, some people would complain. Some women might complain that they were a bit masculine or too masculine when they would engage in sexist behavior. But it's interesting you point that out, because that is sort of when I was in Japan, something that was commonly heard, that those statements would often come from the Japanese political economic elite, that they wanted Japanese males to work harder. They thought maybe they were slacking off, and it was sort of a way to humiliate them, I thought at the time.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Darlene, Deborah, Elle, and Becky. Darlene, go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Brian, for connecting the cuteness to us. But when does cuteness age out? Number one. Number two, we still have cuteness today when you look at Korean pop stars like BTS, and you look at Blackpink. Okay, so the cuteness is still very prevalent in modern society. And third, I'm a little disturbed that, from my perspective as a female, that the dominant society sees females of Asian descent as cute Cupid dolls because, they perpetuate the image of the schoolgirl image. Mm-hmm. So can you give me some feedback about those three areas?
Well, so your first question had to do with when does cuteness age out? And mm-hmm. I mean, the way I would look at that is, well, that's an individual issue. So some people, male, female, might still be into cuteness no matter how old they are. And they're, I mean, when I was in Japan, cuteness is such, it can be a very ambiguous term in a way. I mean, I remember hearing young girls refer to an old man struggling to get on a train with a cane as being cute, So I think it really depends on the individual. And you brought up Korean pop stars who I don't really follow. I don't know much about them myself, but from what I've seen, they sort of buy in to this idea of cuteness also. What that means, of course, I'm not
They are cute.
They are cute. Okay, well, there you go. There you go. So depends on the individual. So many people would like it. But, this, and by the way, I'm sure you're aware of this, this cuteness supposedly that we see, not just in Japan anymore, but in different parts of Asia, whether we're talking about Korea, parts of China, Hong Kong, Singapore, there's this idea that, oh, this is all from Japan, this sort of Asian love affair with cuteness. And there's some truth to that, but I think it's more complicated than that, because I think if you look carefully in all those different diverse societies of Asia, you're going to find their own use, their own interpretation of cuteness. And then the third point about this eroticization, if I can say that word, of Asian females in general, not just Japanese. Of course, this is a real powerful trope that we see all over the world, quite frankly. Why is that the case? I mean, I think what we have is a confluence of different forces. We have an exoticism, an Orientalism, and it just seems that, unfortunately, because many people have Orientalized Asia and have sexualized Asian women, we're going to see this linkage between the particular example you gave was schoolgirls in uniforms. And I've written a bit about that, actually, about how the image of the Japanese schoolgirl is highly, in Japan, and I assume maybe outside Japan, highly eroticized. And so, I think it's obvious what that says. It says that there's a lot of sexism, and that the structures of patriarchy are very, very pronounced. But again, I want to be careful. I don't want to say that this is a Japanese problem or an Asian problem. You find this in other parts of the world as well.
Next up is Deborah, L, and Becky. Deborah.
Hi. Okay. So this is kind of two parts. It goes along with the whole, I guess, idea of sexism toward women and toward girls, I guess. Yeah. So I remember a few years ago for the 40th anniversary of Hello Kitty, it came out and it was a weird story, but all these different newspapers were covering it, that Hello Kitty she's not a cat, but she's a girl, which was a weird thing. And there's a whole backstory about this, that she's a British girl or something like that. And people were like, that's odd. Why is she represented that way? And apparently, I mean, even 40 years afterwards, and I guess now a few years later, it's defended that, oh, she'd be more approachable that way. She can be a friend to people, and not just to children, I think. Like you were talking about the commercialism aspect in Japan, and I guess internationally too. And I like Hello Kitty. I think it's very cute. I like the fashion. But if you think about it, I feel like that does underscore this idea that she's not a capable young woman or even necessarily a role model to girls. It's like she's so cute and innocent. And I was wondering, I guess the first part of the question is if there's a male equivalent to Hello Kitty or something I know there are other Sanrio characters, but something like that. And also when you were talking about the fashion, if there's any kind of stylistic or specific fashion backlash. I know there are all different kinds of fashion, but specifically to this idea of kawaii or cuteness.
Thank you. You actually brought up a lot of interesting things. So let me quickly try to answer the last question you had about a backlash to cuteness in the world of aesthetics. Yes, there is. I can't give specific examples off the top of my head, but you do have things like, I think there is, I can't remember how to say it in Japanese, and I think there is something ugly cuteness. There's certainly ero, or for erotic cuteness. That's not necessarily a backlash, but it's certainly a different way of looking at cuteness. So, and this relates to what we were talking before, that Jonathan brought up, that Japanese artist Murakami, who uses cuteness in a subversive way. So yes, so to answer your question, like I said, I can't give specific examples, but yes, the most certainly is what we might call a backlash to cuteness. And as Hello Kitty is really fascinating. So 21 years ago, I actually wrote an article just on Hello Kitty. And there's another Japanese scholar Japanese American scholar, wrote a whole book on Hello Kitty. So there's been a lot of research on Hello Kitty. And you're right. Hello Kitty, I forget the details. I used to know all this, but Hello Kitty actually in this imaginary space is not from Japan. She's not Japanese. She's British or English or something. And she has a whole family, and she has brothers and sisters. There is a whole backstory about Hello Kitty. And so the question is, then why do you have a Japanese company pushing a foreigner, basically? And it's because for the Japanese consumer, it makes Hello Kitty more appealing because there's a sort of Occidentalism, a sort of exoticism connected to Hello Kitty. I don't know how many people really think that far, the average consumer, average Japanese consumer about Hello Kitty. But if you get into her, she has a whole world that has been cultivated by corporate interest in order to push her products. And to answer something else you asked, yeah, Hello Kitty does have a boyfriend. Last I heard, Dear Daniel. He's a cat too. And actually, when I first started to research Hello Kitty, a young female student pointed out to me what she thought about Hello Kitty, and she mentioned that Hello Kitty does not have a mouth, or does not have much of a mouth. And for this young Japanese woman, that symbolized how many Japanese women do not have a voice, or at least have a problem struggling to voice their opinions. And so again, that's a really, I think there are a lot more examples like that among Japanese, specifically Japanese women. They have a much more sophisticated understanding, a much more ironic understanding of these cute images.
And don't notice it's all there. Okay, wonderful. All right, welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right, it's time for takeaways and questions. So you can talk about your takeaways, or you can talk just about your questions, or you can talk about both. If you'd like to speak, go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat. Keep on topic, be brief, and be courteous. Who'd like to go first? Elle, yes, Elle and Becky get to go first. Elle, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you, Brian, as well. My question is, how is cuteness used less than overtly, namely perhaps subliminally in Japan? And does the military use that at all? And thank you for your answer.
Brian, you're on mute.
Okay, so yes, as I said before, the military has used cute images for purposes of recruitment, but I think overall to soften their image. Because remember, unlike the United States, in Japan, their military plays a very ambiguous role. It's very controversial for some Japanese. And that's why they don't even like to say that they have a military. They call it a self-defense force. And so cuteness is a real good image softener, we might say. The first thing you asked, I wasn't too sure. I was a little uncertain what you meant about subliminal. I mean,
is cuteness always overt and seen? Is it used subliminally?
Yeah. Well, could you give me an example of subliminal?
Yes. To convince or to change an attitude or behavior, something which is designed to do that, and uses cuteness on the less than. It may be visual, but it's not evident by simple sight. I mean, sight is used. I mean, I think you know what I mean. It's not something I could pick up and say, well, this appears to be cute. It's embedded in something. Is it used in advertising and that kind of thing on a subliminal or basis?
Yes, I mean, I think the general answer I would give would be yes, absolutely. It's used by advertisers, marketing campaigns. I mean, I think whether they're successful or not of unconsciously convincing people to buy their product, that's another question. But they most certainly, I think, try to use cuteness, as you put it, in a subliminal way. And also, by the way, cuteness is expressed not just visually. You can write about cuteness in text, describe a cute scene, and also something I didn't mention, but in Japan, and again, this is another kind of controversial issue, and I don't want to sound sexist, but in Japan, the idea is that women are supposed to speak in a higher voice, almost like Mickey Mouse. Not all women do that, of course, but the idea is that that's more cute, that women are not supposed to use a low voice or baritone. Again, that's not to say, we can't generalize here, but I'm just pointing out that cuteness has different sensory modalities, not just visual, but also auditory.
Thank you. Becky's question from before the breakout rooms was, has the Japanese concept of cuteness influenced corporate business settings?
Well, it depends what you mean by a corporate business.
Whatever happens in the way in which the Japanese corporations do business, how is that influenced? Or what are the various ways in which the concept of cuteness has influenced that?
Well, corporations use cute logos, cute icons, cute images constantly. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but most definitely.
I think what she was meaning was within a company. So when you go inside a Japanese corporation,
okay,
in how they work, how they do things, is there, how does this concept of cuteness carry over there inside?
Probably, again, it depends what you're looking at. I mean, there's so many things you could look at, I suppose, to answer that question. Sure. But I would think so. And so for example, training manuals. I used to read a lot of training manuals in Japan, and it was very common for them to use in-house instructions based on cuteness. And then again, there's also, how does a superior relate to an inferior? Is there sort of a cute atmosphere, you might say, being evoked? Does a woman use cuteness in order to influence her supervisor in some way? Again, I would say that probably that does happen.
Wonderful. So next up is going to be Linda, Takako, and Tanya. Linda.
We started discussing this in the breakout. I'm wondering if cuteness is the extreme of a spectrum in which the lower, the horrible end is where women are abused more, but it's not reported or it's not prosecuted because of, it would be considered not honorable to admit it. Such extreme cuteness just doesn't ring true.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. So yeah, this is something that we discussed in the breakout section, and as I said, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And in general, the way I would put it is that there's a darker side to cuteness, and cuteness does hide power relations, and sometimes those relations are quite exploitative. I mean, we have to stop and ask ourselves, why would the military, why would multinational corporations, why would the Japanese police, why would the Japanese government use cuteness? I'm not saying they're all evil. I'm not saying that they're all up to no good. I'm just saying that probably somewhere in there, there are things that they don't, they want to soften their image to begin with. But in general, especially when it comes to male-female relationships, I think there is sort of a dark side to it. But cuteness is a two-edged sword. It's used by those who have power, and it can be used by those who don't have power. It goes both ways. The dynamic is quite complex, but as we talked, as I mentioned, I think you brought up in the breakout section, in Japan, there is a lot of, probably, again, I don't have the statistics, so I don't know, but my impression when I was in Japan is that there are a lot of underreported sex crimes. And there is something called pornography cuteness, where you have, and that's one thing, but then things get really bad, of course, if we're talking about child pornography that's cute, where some men have a fetish for underage women who look cute but are inappropriately sexualized. That does play a role, of course, in Japan too.
Next up is going to be Takako, Tanya, Anne, and John. Takako.
Yeah, thank you for very entertaining discussion, I guess, analysis of a country. I consider myself, I mean, I'm still Japanese citizenship. Came to United States when I was 14, and all my relatives are still in Japan. And so I go there like 3 months of a year still. And so it's very interesting to hear what people think and how they view. And a lot of questions that I could answer that I just went so fast that I just kept my mouth shut. But one thing I noticed, I think nobody brought up, that a subjective view of kawaii. It's used as a discipline tool as a girl growing up, that when I do things like speak up, then my mother would say, that's not cute, meaning that's not good. And so I never thought of it. I mean, I knew it was hard for me to speak up. It's not considered a very good thing to do, but I just remembered in connection to kawaii that how strong pressure to be kawaii. It's good to be kawaii as a woman, and even though kawaii has many meanings, it's very different from cute. But I just remembered it, that it's not a good thing.
Takako and anybody else, I mean, those of you who have experience in Japan, feel free to talk. If you want to talk for 5 minutes, that's fine, because you are adding a lot more to the conversation. I mean, one of the things we are trying to do is to understand other cultures. And what happens is that it's actually very interesting. Like sometimes, I'm from India. So there are many things in Indian culture where only somebody from outside will notice something. They will not, the people, once you're in the culture, you don't, at the same time, because you're from India, you can talk about something Indian to other people, which they otherwise would not get. So please feel, so thank you very much for your observations. And if later on, if you want to say more, you or anybody who's familiar with Japanese culture, you're welcome to do that. Brian, go ahead. Sorry about the interruption. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for that comment, Takako. I think you're right. I think that's a very important point. So cuteness is very ubiquitous. And the word cute in English is just a translation of the word kawaii. And as you seem to say, kawaii actually has a far more broad, has many definitions actually. Cute is the best we can do in English, but actually kawaii, I think, contains a lot more meanings. And the other thing I'd like to point out that you said that I think is very important, cuteness is used as a socializing tool, as you seem to say, to discipline people, usually young people, but even to be more specific, my impression is to socialize young girls and women to behave a certain way.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's kind of like a velvet glove,
Yes, that's right.
It's outside, it looks very nice, but it's actually a very serious thing. Next up is going to be Tanya, Anne, Jean, John, and Linda. Tanya.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. It's been fascinating talking about the propaganda of cuteness. And also to Takako, I'm Chinese, and it's just really interesting hearing how you were brought up, because my mother didn't actually use those words when I was brought up, but she said different things. She would say things like, "You're a woman, you need to work hard." So, but I wasn't ever told to be cute, which is probably a good thing. But I wanted to ask you, Brian, about whether you think things are going to change, and whether you've seen a change in the last 10 years, or whether things are going to change, whether there's a shift and women are starting to say no. What is going to happen, do you think? Is this going to continue?
That's a very big, important question. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't really been following Japan close enough these past 10 years or so to answer that question. Are things going to change? When I was in Japan, beginning in the late 80s, people were always asking, is Japan going to change? And, it seems to me in many ways, Japan is always changing like any society, but in some ways it does not change. That doesn't mean it won't ever change. And it really depends what we're looking at. So for example, to be very specific, in higher education, I was a critic. I worked in Japanese universities for many years, and I was known as a critic of the system. And I said, I don't think things are going to change for the foreseeable future. And my impression is that things have not changed in terms of reform, major reforms. However, in other ways, Japan has changed. What those ways are, of course, I don't feel qualified right now to speak to, but it really depends. And I mean, you're asking about gender relations, I assume, and I'm not sure, actually. I would hope that things have changed. In terms of cuteness, my impression is that if cuteness is a barometer, if it's an indicator of gender sexual relations, it looks like things haven't changed that much.
Yeah, quite a few friends of mine from Japan have left because they don't like how they don't want to fit in. So they move to England, they move to America.
Right. Yeah. Well, that says something.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next up is Anne. Anne, go ahead.
Hey, well, I was just wondering how, though, that fits into the more general Japanese value of social harmony and versus, rebellion. There's no, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, there's no Japanese figures like the American one of, the hero who fights society and transforms it, or, the rebellious, alienated hero. It's all about, harmony. And so I'm wondering the role, therefore, that cuteness has in encouraging social harmony and encouraging protectiveness. Something that's cute elicits feelings of protectiveness. To what extent, for example, in a highly patriarchal society, is it like a strategy to elicit protectiveness towards women? But that goes into the more general, I'm guessing, value of everybody being protective towards each other. And even young men seem to me to be rather, there's no, aggressive, rebellious type. Even young men are kind of cute. In Japan and Korea, the boy bands and so on, they're cute. And as for the government, well, the idea that the government should be protective towards the citizens, then doesn't the whole cuteness thing also have to do with what role society thinks the government should have, and that it shouldn't be repressive, but it should be protective and like a father, like paternalistic towards its citizens? But cuteness helps to promote those feelings. That's my theory anyway. Would you have any comment?
Okay. Thank you for that comment. So actually, yes, I think you're right in general. This idea that cuteness seems to suggest that Japan is socially harmonious. I should say, cuteness, I think, is an attempt to make Japan look socially harmonious. But the reality is Japan is not that harmonious in many ways. And again, it depends what you look at. I mean, my impression in Japan, as I said before, they had a lot of, there wasn't much street crime. I never really felt in danger. But that does not mean that there was not, conflict did not exist. There was conflict in Japan. And I think Americans sometimes get this idea that that there's no individuality in Japan. But if you look at Japanese history, you don't have to go back that far. There are many, many examples of brave Japanese who stood up against the shogun and were executed. They stood up for their principles. There were many leaders, very influential, powerful individuals during for example, when Japan started to modernize in the Meiji period. So I think that's sort of a myth that we get of Japan, that they lack strong individuals and that they lack individuality. That's not my impression. And again, this idea of social harmony, I think many aesthetics in Japan are an attempt to hide conflict, but there is conflict there. I think in some ways, in some domains, they handle conflict better than Americans do, but in other ways, maybe they don't. For example, when it comes to relations between males and females, there are a lot of things go unreported or don't make it to the media. And there are many examples since the war where the Japanese central authorities would oppress or repress people's rights. Japan is a democracy. It's more democratic in some ways than America is, but Japan, it's not I don't know if I'd call it it's not liberal. It's not a liberal democracy the way America is. It's closer to Europe in many, I think in most ways. America is the outlier. America is unusual, I think, compared to many other industrialized nations, including Japan. So in any case, maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Jean, John, and Linda. Jean.
Yeah, so I watched a movie Father yesterday, and Tony Hobson played this guy, and the nurse trying to say, oh, eat this blue little pill. And he is very offended. He said, do you think I'm retarded? So I can quite relate to that. I think the cuteness is like you describe kids as cute. For you describe a mature woman as cute, it's kind of like, how do you say, it's not very respectful in some way because you treat them like kids. They need to be protected. You're innocent. I think, luckily, I grew up in China and this cultural illusion, which have a lot of bad side effects. But the only good thing I said is the woman is liberated. And I know a lot of women are working and they're independent. But I heard a lot in Japan, if the woman really want to do the career, they end up cannot have families because the whole system is not supporting them. So I actually know a lot of women, in Japan, working women, they don't have family, they don't have kids. It's such a big punishment. So I think personally, I think this cuteness is big damaging for women's image. They're grab that image for yourself. You need to be protected, you need to be agreeable, you need to please other people. You cannot think independently. You cannot, so it's not good for them. I think it's very damaging. I see even in Korean, it's a similar thing. Korean and Japan, I think they need to change, but I'm not sure how is it now and if they are willing to change internally.
Okay. Yeah. So as I said, I haven't looked at the recent statistics of what's going on in Japan in terms of male-female relations in corporate culture and politics, things like that. But you seem to be saying, and I would tend to agree, that probably things have not changed dramatically in Japan when it comes to gender equality. I mean that seems to be that's the impression I get, and so I think a lot of work needs to be done there.
Excellent comments, Jean. Thanks. Next up is John, Linda, and Madeline. John.
Yeah. So I was, I have read a bit like I read the novel Shogun, basically. I don't know if you remember. It's a great novel. I don't know necessarily. I know it's based on Edo, the rise of sort of the Tokugawa shogunate. I've also, I mean, just recently, there's a sort of docudrama series on Netflix about the Civil War period in Japan, which is sort of this interesting. It's sort of, I mean, they're actually, Netflix is putting out all this they're sort of like half documentary and half like action series, and so they're sort of like, they'll be like, okay, here's a bunch of violence and like those sort of gory parts and like all the intrigue and stuff, and then they'll have a historian talk about it. It seems like they try to be historically accurate, but anyway, I guess my question is, when sort of learning about that period, reading the sort of fiction based off of it, I see some elements in sort of the culture today, right? Of course, but one word that doesn't come to mind is cute about much of it, right? And, like, there's not really much cuteness either in the portrayal of women or what's going on. It seems, so I guess my question, can you maybe help connect the dots a bit about how the culture has gone, assuming that you agree with that premise, how the culture has sort of gone from that period to some of what's going on today and how we sort of view, because it seems like, I mean, is cuteness sort of a cultural manifestation of a longer history of Japan that's sort of been surfaced today? Thanks.
Okay, well, I think what I would say is the type of cuteness that I've been talking about is very much a product of the modern world, very much a product of modern Japan, especially since the end of World War II. Cuteness, as we see it now in Japan, is very much implicated or produced by corporate culture and marketing campaigns, people trying to sell things. I mean, you can find something like cuteness going back centuries, I suppose, but you're not going to find it at the mass scale that you see today in Japan.
I just want to add something. I've been reading Marshall McLuhan, and he talks about the effect of media on people. And this looks like a television event to me, because
Yes.
it requires a level of transmission and going back and forth of such a massive quantity that you can't really have it in the print world. You can't have it before the television. So my guess is that I am sure that there is like a underlying ideas that were there. Like, for example, the visuality that you talk about, which is already there in the Japanese culture as being a very powerful way of communicating with each other or capturing what you're thinking. And then on the top of that, you have this medium of television, which just kind of explodes phenomena. So that would be my guess, but that's just my guess. But it makes perfect sense with the nature of the medium itself.
Yes.
Next up is going to be Linda, followed by Madeline.
Someone in the chat had compared Miss Hello Kitty to the Barbie doll in America. In America, many of us have been offended by how Barbie tried to portray the, quote, perfect woman, unquote. I suspect that Hello Kitty is just as insulting to many Asian women. Unfortunately, I suspect many cannot object as strenuously as many of us did to Barbie.
Okay. Well, so there are two things you said that Hello Kitty plays the role of Barbie, and then the Japanese woman can't object. And actually, the other important point is that many Japanese, maybe many Asian women don't like the image that Hello Kitty portrays. And I think you're right. And that's a very important point. There are many Asian women, many Japanese women who don't like, or maybe they're even offended by the sexist implications of Hello Kitty. But I think if you went to Japan, walked around, talked to some people, I think you would find some Japanese women who would explicitly verbalize their discomfort or disagreement about the image of Hello Kitty. I mean, when I was in Japan, many people, many women I interviewed did not like Hello Kitty, and I found it sort of silly or offensive.
Next one is Madeline. Madeline, go ahead. Tanya, you had something. Go ahead.
I was going to say something about Hello Kitty because from what I remember growing up, I was interested in Hello Kitty and thought Hello Kitty was cute up until maybe about the age of 9. After that, I thought Hello Kitty is boring, and I just I wasn't interested in Hello Kitty because it just appeals to very young girls. Well, but the problem with Barbie is that Barbie is actually a grown-up woman. You know, she's like what your role model is. It's that you look to her and you think, you know how people are playing houses with Kenny and all this Kenny and Barbie, and I don't know, it's actually maybe worse Barbie because she's, you know, a fully formed woman.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's problematic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I think you're right.
Next up is Madeline.
Yes. Something that Anne said got me thinking, as is often the case. Thank you, Anne. It was about the idea we've been talking about the cute young men, the boy bands, the politeness, the fitting into the corporate hierarchy, the kawaii. And I was thinking, okay, what about the bad boys like James Dean or Tokyo Drift? And then I thought, wait a minute, there's a whole much darker side to Japanese culture that we haven't touched upon, that we also have here in the US. It is a highly organized paramilitary with a corporate structure. They deal drugs, they do extortion, they buy and sell human beings, guns dealing, other kinds of weapons dealing. They're very violent and they're very well connected in the government. So in Japan, they're called the Yakuza. Most people have probably heard of them by that name. In the US, we call them gangs. I think in Central and South America, they're usually called narcos. They're immensely powerful and there's nothing cute about them. And they mask themselves because what they do is illegal, but they don't mask their power the way, say, the military or the police do with cuteness.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so that's a very important commentary. So in Japan, Yakuza, usually that's translated as mafia, organized crime, but in any case, Yakuza play a very, from what I have heard and read, a very big role in Japanese society. And what's disturbing about Yakuza is they are very well connected to right-wing political movements, right-wing political leaders in Japan. And many politicians who ordinarily seem like fine people actually supposedly get their support, get their money, get their funding from Yakuza. And so, again, I don't know, it's nothing I've studied myself, but living in Japan, Yakuza were everywhere. Yakuza, like organized crime in this society, Yakuza are used by the average Japanese sometimes to take care of an unpleasant problem. I won't go into details, but somebody I knew had a problem and they relied on Yakuza. They just had to pay some money to take care of a problem. Nobody was murdered or anything, but the point I'm making is that, again, that is a darker side to Japanese society that perhaps many of us are not that familiar with. Yakuza are also at the same time romanticized in a lot of Japanese literature, Japanese cinema. You know, in the same way organized crime is romanticized in this country, you know, in the United States too. But that's an important. There is nothing cute about the Yakuza.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. What I want to do is we have maybe about 15 minutes left. So let's kind of look forward and see what are the various things we can talk about. So one of the things I'm really curious about is the samurai culture. That's one. We also, I think next time we're going to be talking about how would you put it? It's not visualization, visuality of Japanese. And looks like Mike has a question. Mike, I'll give you 2 minutes. But you need to unmute yourself to speak.
Okay, takes a while to find the unmute key. And I think that to some extent, people have asked what has changed between the 80s, the 90s, and now. And I think economics, and I want your opinion on it, and the relative role of Japan locally and internationally, and their economy, and the concept of a job for life of people, of the working sector, had a big influence on it. And in Japan and maybe other nations too have been a mixture of humility and a certain amount of pride and even arrogance. And when Japan was buying real estate and stock market, getting control of companies in all over the world, things were a little bit different for the Japanese at home, and Japanese who were given a job of starting a Honda plant in Tennessee, for example. So internationally, that had a big change in it. What do you think? And there's a lot of examples right now. Japan is vulnerable to what's going on in North Korea, and there's been eclipsed by in the economics by China and even Vietnam. How do you feel that economics and its associated politics has changed the concept of cuteness and some of the other things we've been talking about over the last few months in your presentations? And I yield the balance of my time and I eagerly await your reply. And I have some vested interest in your answer.
Okay.
Wow. Just 2 minutes and just amazing question, Mike. Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I hope your vested interest is not too big, because I can't really speak to what the Japanese economy is doing. And I'm not sure exactly how it would relate to cuteness, but I will say that the Japanese economy is still the world's third or fourth most powerful economy, depending on what measurements you look at. It's still a contender. And I think the problem is when I was in Japan, the American media pays attention to certain things. They pay attention to the stock market. When I was in Japan, commentators would pay attention to, does the average person have a job and can they support their family? And I think that's, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe I'm off, but I get that impression back in America, where the media, the economic elite, they're concerned about the stock market, where they have their investments. And of course, they measure employment rates. But in Japan, I think the economic elites there, they're not so concerned with the stock market. They're more concerned with bread and butter issues. Like does the average person, can the average working person get by on a job? And when I was in Japan, many times, especially in the 90s, supposedly the Japanese economy was in the doldrums and people were all upset. What's going to happen to Japan? Japan has lost its way. It's collapsing. When I was in Japan, I did not get that impression that that's what the real Japanese economy is doing. And I think we have to make a distinction between media reports and what certain economists say about a society. They have their own research view, they have their own assumptions, versus what's actually going on in a society. And again, I don't know, I haven't studied this closely for many years, but my impression is that the Japanese economy has some very strong fundamentals. And right now there is a lot more international competition, not just with the Vietnamese and South Koreans, but also with China, of course. But nevertheless, as I said, the fundamentals, the foundation of the Japanese economy are strong. And I hope you don't make any investment decisions based on what I said. And I hope that gives, again, I can't speak specifically to the Japanese economy. And I'm not sure how that would relate to Cuteness, except to say that there are some Japanese companies who have cashed in overseas on the image of Cuteness that has been so consumed by North Americans and Europeans and other people from around the world.
Thank you. I mean, I like this kind of wide-ranging conversation. So at the end, let's do this. So, I mean, one of the big things that I see about Japan is that it is getting older. You know,
yes.
The population is getting older, and that's a very significant thing. The median age keeps moving up, and I think by 2050 it is projected to cross like 65 or so, the median age. So that's half the people are above that. So that's one thing. The second thing is that in New York, there is a lot of Japanese who have come to New York, young Japanese who have come to New York in the past 10 years. And I talk to many of them because they're mostly around kind of East Village. And it's very interesting. So unlike immigrants from other countries, they actually intend to go back. Most of them intend to go back. And when I asked them about why they are here, you know, what are they doing? So they think that we need to learn something about outside. And so I think there is a lot of things about kind of being inward looking versus outward looking and being able to integrate with the rest of the world. So I think Japan is going through a lot of things, kind of very large scale issues, mostly at the kind of demographic level. And so any thoughts about that?
Yes, Shrikant, thanks for bringing that up. That's actually very important. Japan right now is experiencing a sort of demographic crush, as it were. When I was there, of course, there was a lot of talk about how the Japanese population is aging and how this will affect work, and perhaps the tax base will be diminished because you don't have enough people producing and working. And this relates to a debate in Japan about immigrants. And again, I don't know what the numbers are now, but since the war, Japanese have not been big on immigrants. I'm not comfortable with saying Japan is an anti-immigrant society. That's a bit harsh sounding, but I do think that there's an element of truth to that. At least when I was there, there are immigrants, there are minorities who live in Japan from overseas, but there are not a lot. And the idea is that in the United States, Canada, Europe, so much of the economy depends on a migrant workforce or immigrant workforce. And the Japanese, not Japanese people, but certainly elements within the Japanese government seem resistant to that idea of letting in large numbers. They do let some people in, but they still seem resistant to opening up the doors to more immigration. And that probably will not have I can't see how that will have a positive effect going forward with their economy. And also, to sort of go a step above in scale here, there's a lot of what I see Japan, a problem in Japan now is in their international neighborhood with the Chinese and with North Korea. And when I was in Japan in the 90s, my students did not want to talk about that. There was an ideology in Japan that we're a peaceful country. We learned our lesson in World War II. We don't have a military. We don't have to worry about anybody. Everyone loves us. We're minding our own business. And it really struck me how I thought they were being naive at the time. And of course, events the past 10, 15 years have borne that out. The Chinese have become more assertive militarily. And of course, we know what's going on in North Korea. So Japan is perhaps at a crossroads right now. And I think they have changed their military posture. The Japanese government is being more honest about what military actions they may have to take vis-a-vis North Korea and China.
Absolutely. I can't resist to talk about immigration. I think America is very different because people can become American. Most countries like Japan, or even countries like France, or you can't really become a Japanese. If worst comes to worst, they will say, okay, we have to get these other people, but they are different and they remain here for some time and then they're out. Or even if they're here, like you can be an Italian, go to France, you can live there for 3 generations, you'll still be considered Italian by most French, and you would also consider yourself. So in that sense, America is in a very powerful position because of its openness, where people can genuinely become Americans in every sense of the word. And that's something that, I think we are fortunate that's, not just fortunate, but that's the core of our strength. Because it just takes in, anybody who wants to add to the culture can add to our culture. So I think especially with the aging population, countries that don't do that are having difficulty doing that, are going to have trouble. And there was a time where there was lots of desperate immigrants wanting to go someplace. The wealth is going up in the rest of the world. So it's important to be able to attract those people, which, so it's not, it's not a, what shall I say? It's not a buyer's market, it's a seller's market, it's moving towards that. So I think immigration is a very large part of the kind of this global puzzle. And I think on that, I think America is situated in a much better position. But sorry about the digression. Coming back to next time. So can you give a short preview of what you're talking about next time about visuality?
Well, so I think I mentioned years ago, I tried to get a paper published on visuality in Japan. I was unsuccessful. I was able to find that paper, because we're talking 20, 25 years. And so it's going to be based on that. And I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to say, but it's going to have to do perhaps with media and the psychology of visuality and how this intersects with pop culture, and how why visuality seems to play a different role, not just between different societies, but within different societies. So that's a little bit vague, I guess, but in any case, I'll definitely put something together on visuality.
Excellent. All right, Brian, thank you very much. And thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for good questions.